Before I start the video, I want to talk briefly about the development that happened today, where Games Workshop released the first of their new quarterly balance updates. This is a great change. Very excited for it. There have been a lot of cool things happen out of this particular change today, but it did abruptly potentially affect the topic of the video for today way faster than I expected it might. So the video won't reflect any of the new updates, simply because I had already finished filming it before this development happened, but hadn't quite published the video yet. So please take that in mind, and let's get on to it. Today we're looking at Tau Remoras. Wait, really? Isn't that kind of random? So yeah, this video is kind of random. I just want to say up front, look, this Tau project is something I've been working on for a while for my good friend, and I think we're gonna make it a bit of a check-in here, an army review video off and on. We'll kind of like maybe see if we can expand some things with it, and hopefully there'll be some value in it for you. I think there's a lot of reasons why reviews like this can be good, regardless of which army you play. Also, with things going on, it can be difficult to get videos produced quickly sometimes, so I was definitely murdering the midnight oil on this one. Let's get into it. So the Tau Remora kit from Forgeworld, like a lot of their kits, comes in a Ziploc bag. There are sometimes a box that you get as well. Just depends on what kit it is. I built this one previously because it's 2 Remoras per bag, so I've done a couple already, getting ready to kind of finish this off. And what you get inside of these Forgeworld kits is not always the same, but you generally get a guide for resin kits. They go over some tools and instructions and things that they recommend for a bunch of different things that they talk about. Going over that briefly, a lot of us are aware of the stories about Forgeworld resin and quality control issues and things like this. Sometimes it's true. Look, it's not always up to par. There can be gaps, there can be warping, there can be bubbles, there can be miscasting. So, look, it's unfortunate, but it's kind of just one of the things that happens with Forgeworld. The potential is there for them to be amazing, just amazing kits, but you do sometimes have to do some extra work, so... Also, the instructions, very simplistic, and this is not a toy. So for anyone talking about, oh, they're just toy soldiers, well, Forgeworld tells you it's not a toy. We can have a friendly debate about that, but anyway, simplistic instructions, not for everybody. Some people need a little bit heavier duty instructions. These kits are a little bit more advanced, I would say. And one thing about this kit that is... not entirely unique, but is sometimes unique, is that it's entirely new resin. There's no pre-existing parts in this, save for the hover/flight stand bases that I'm pulling out here. They are all bespoke to Forgeworld, and so these are the bases that you get with things like speeders, with wave serpents, with Necron Ghost Arcs, you name it. Just a very common little flight stand base there. And we do have all our resin parts. We have the main body of the Remora drone there, attached to that sort of... It's not exactly a sprue. It's like a... I don't know what you call it. I actually don't know the name of that. But I do point out a little bit later that I tend to keep those things. We've got wings. We're going to have 2 pair of wings per drone. They are foldable if you do not glue them in place, which it doesn't recommend that you do. You can see a little bit of warping on the wing. We've got our large or long-barreled burst cannons that go on. Those are keyed to each side. They are specific to each side of the drone. The Forgeworld resin, in general, is a little bit lighter. Here we've got some of the thruster parts. These are the intakes that you attach some of the thrusters to. It's a bit of an odd construction on this one, actually. How some of these thruster parts go together. There we've got the central thruster and also 2 of the missile parts. And then we do also have the front section of the missiles and the two smaller rear thrusters, where they're kind of odd. They kind of have this weird sort of almost hairdryer look to them. So we're going to pull out the trusty kit. I have a fishing tackle box. I mean, look, everybody, you got hobby stuff you're doing, put together a box for your tools. We're going to look over some little bit of tools here that I'm going to use. In this case, look, these are tools that I use for all my kits. You know, I just get in there and pick and choose what I need. But I would say if you're not organizing stuff in a similar way to this, I'd recommend it. At least, you know, give it a shot. Gonna pull out my cheapo little clippers there, nippers, which I like quite well. Hobby knife. Choose your own. I have mine there. You can have multiple. I actually have multiple. Sanding stick, homemade sanding stick. There's 4 grits on this. Talked about it before. Primarily only use one of the grits in this particular case with the resin, but still useful. Toothbrush. Old toothbrush or cheap toothbrush or whatever toothbrush. I'm actually going to use the one that's not in the kit. They're basically the same, just different color. And also I'm going to pull out a file. I have some interesting files. They're definitely unique. They're not like the standard hobby files you're going to normally see. So any questions about those, I am very happy to talk about them. And so yeah, closing up the kit. Going to also pull out my little container scrap sandpaper. Sandpaper I've used before. Just all sorts of grits. I just think it's super useful. It'll get you a little basket to throw some sandpaper in. And then a mask, a respirator, because yeah, we are working on resin. When you're working on resin, you create dust especially when you're sanding. If you're using any tools like powered tools like Dremels or things like that, you do not want resin dust in your lungs, everybody. That is not a good thing. And so I recommend using that. And then lastly, we're going to have a cutting mask, or a cutting mat, sorry. Talking about masks and mats. Very similar. Pulling out the main body of the Remora. It has some attachments and things to that main, it's not a sprue, I don't know what you call it. It's a block. It's like a trapezoid of some type. Cut towards the model with the flat of your clippers, nippers, however you want to call it. I do this with the plastic as well. And you're going to cut a little bit away. Leave you a little bit of excess that you can trim off easier later, that you're not cutting into any part of the kit. With resin, it is even more imperative, I would say, because it is so much easier to cut. You will cut through your resin without even knowing it by comparison to your plastic, unless it's super thin plastic. So I'm going to go in there. Do a lot of cleanup with the nippers. I do show that here in a little bit. And there's definitely some things like with resin, you get more things like flash. You get these little tubes and things. And also due to the nature of these resin kits, there's a lot more casting errors or blemishes or holes, like little bubbles or whatever you want to call it. So I go around and clean up as much as I can. You fill gaps and little bubbles and things. This is some of the off trim. And interestingly, these bases that these Forgeworld kits come on, I actually really do like getting a good little Forgeworld kit because you get these things. And I find these super useful for basing and diorama, so I'm just taking a little bit of extra time out to show these things, because if you haven't used them before, I highly recommend just trimming off these extra pegs and bits and things, sticking them in your bits bin, or your terrain bin, or your basing bits bin, or whatever you want to call it, a drawer, a junk drawer, whatever. And carving them or whatever. They make jersey barriers. They make all sorts of cool things. You can just stick them on whatever you like. So now we have the one of the long-barreled weapons here, and this is a pretty common connection for these Forgeworld, where they have a cylinder connection to a larger part that I've come across, and I just wanted to show cutting that one because it's going to create a circular nub there where it's been removed, and I'm actually going to go in with the nippers and remove a bunch of the excess, like harder material. It's just going to make it easier for cleanup later. You can cut off more material this way if you're methodical, you're careful, you're being patient. It gets it down closer, and it's not removing anything important. Just helping out for when we need to go clean it up and make it nice and smooth. And also, I thought it would be a good idea to show these thruster sections. This is the air intake that goes across the back of the drone's fuselage, and the way they're connected is a bit odd. So again, we're going in there with the flat of the clipper closer to the part, making sure to stay away from any of the detail, give us a little bit of extra space. And then again, where it's a little bit odd, but odd shape there, using the nipper to trim away the excess really helps to reduce your amount of work later with like your hobby knife and your sanding and stuff like that. You're still going to do a little bit of sanding, still a little hobby knife and stuff like that. And a thing I will say is when you get in there with sanding and stuff like that, this resin does take to sandpaper, sanding sticks, files, and stuff like that. It takes to it amazingly. You get a good finish off of it. The resin itself doesn't always have a perfect finish, but yeah, it definitely does well with that. So now another thing you're going to see on these kits in a lot of cases is these little flat flash. So they're kind of flashing. Flashing is usually a much more flimsy, like unintentional section or part of a mold casting. This is intentionally there. These little panels that are kind of attached, but they're not actually part of the sculpt. They have to be removed if you want the sculpt to look proper to the way it was designed. So there's a couple of these primarily on the main body of this kit, and they're not hard to just cut away because they're so thin, and you can get in there and you can cut them out. Taking care, like I am taking care here to not aim the blade towards anything that if I did sort of lose any level of control of it, it would not cut me. And then you can see I'm actually like shaving and sort of scraping away extra with the flat of the blade and the flat of the blade. Both work very well on this resin, and going in underneath and doing another bit of the same, doing a little bit of carving, a little bit of shaving, getting away any excess pieces. And once you get in there, it is not hard to smooth it up nicely as long as you are patient. Never take off more than you have to. Just take off as much as you need to in that pass, and you can always take off more if you need to. But if you dig out too much at the beginning, then you're not gonna be able to put it back. So yeah, that's pretty much a deal I'm gonna move on to and do on this other section here as well. There's like a little, I want to say this is effectively like a gun camera where the wing connection goes on the side, and it has a pretty large piece of, I guess you'd still call it flash there on this kit. And this gives me an opportunity, I think, to talk about. I think it's a cool kit, and I think these Forgeworld kits like this, they have so much potential. The Tau kits are a little unique because it's Tau design, but there are quality control problems on these Forgeworld kits. It's just a sort of the nature of the beast with these things, and but I do think if you're gonna put in a little bit extra time, you can get out a super nice looking finished product on these, where you've got these unique Forgeworld kits. And I would say the Remora specifically, if you are a Tau player listening to this and you haven't done Remoras, you should definitely consider it. I mean, this is a unique unit. It's one of the few units that I think actually still kind of keeps the Tau going right now with unique options and things. If you're a person that plays against Tau and you're not seeing these, I don't know why. Except that they're Forgeworld. Definitely strong. It's got unique rules. You should definitely check them out. So, and like I said, this is me working on one here, but there's actually 4 in this grouping that I'm working on for this ongoing Tau Army project. And the Tau Army, just as a quick aside, is a long-term project that I've been working on for my good friend. Part of the army was a big rescue army where we got a pre-existing army and basically rehabbing it. And let me tell you, it's not always fun. I don't necessarily recommend buying used armies in every case. You want to make sure they are nice and clean. But these Remoras were new, so that's a good. Working on new kits is better than working on used ones. So the wings on this kit are one of the primary things that you would come across that would be warped. Not just on the flat of the wing, but also where that joint section exists. It's a very narrow resin cast piece where it curves. I use, for pieces like this especially, a cheap hairdryer. I think a hairdryer works quite well if you're going to do swords, you're going to do like individual character things. That puts enough heat on for these. I would say if you are doing bigger pieces, thicker pieces that have warping, like these larger Forgeworld kits, I was actually recently watching the Squidmar video where he does the Tau Manta, and they had some very large pieces that were warped. So I would say for that, the hot water method works better. You're gonna get better temperature. Basically, you get them heated up, they're pliable, and then as they cool down, you hold them in place. They hold the shape. So filing, sanding is a big deal on these kits to really smooth things out. There can be some rough flat parts. There can be misaligned edges, things like that. It is different from the plastic. So I'm using one of my coarsest files here because one of the interesting properties of resin is even with a coarse file or coarse sanding, it still comes out pretty smooth. I mean, you can make it smoother, but yeah, this works pretty well. And this particular piece needs to be nice and square because it's a connection piece for those air intakes. Now the long burst cannons here, going back to them, cleaning up that convex section, it's a good thing to show because where I trimmed away with the nippers, I'm going to go back in and do the finer trimming with the knife. I'm just going to rotate. I'm going to take away the edge by sort of angling upward. Away, I'm not digging down into the rounded shape. I'm just angling a bit upward to keep the blade facing towards like the apex of the very center of that circle, and that's going to take off the edge of where that part used to be, and then that's going to allow me to go back in with some sandpaper and smooth it out. And I'm going to use this, which is effectively like 400 grit sandpaper. And unlike the sanding stick there, which is rigid, this is going to be good for a curved surface because the paper is flexible. I'm going to be able to move it around, I'm going to be able to rotate it, and all sorts of stuff. And that's going to give me a pretty good smooth surface there. Even at 400 grit, you really don't have to make it any finer than that on this resin, like I was saying. And you can see a little bit of a color difference there in it if you look closely. But if you were to feel it, if you were to put paint on it or something like that, you will never see any difference there. It's smooth as can be at this point. And so one other thing I thought was kind of important to do with these wings is that connection point where the articulation, where it connects, there's a little, I don't know what you'd call it. It's another bit of casting flash or something in there. It needs to be cut away because that's going to affect how it connects into the hole that it's supposed to slot into. It wouldn't peg in, it wouldn't rotate, it would just be a big mess. So in this case I've cut and I'm doing a little bit of sanding. I would just make sure that you don't make it too loose. And so that's it. I mean, you're basically going to go on to assembly. I have Loctite super glue, it's gel control. I have some setting spray there, it's like Instaset. And I'm basically going to be hooking up the main thruster here. You just put a generous amount of the super glue in, and you should be able to connect the part right away. Sometimes the setting spray or activator, accelerator, some people call it, I mean, it's all of those. is necessary. In this case, it's not, but where I've put the glue in there, some has come out as I pushed it in. I put a generous amount in, so I'm basically just removing excess by swiping it away with that blade tool. And that's not a sharp blade tool, it's just pointed. It's kind of a pointed tool, but that actually kind of fills a gap if there were any, and it also removes that glue, so you're not seeing blobs of glue. You don't want to leave blobs of glue because that's very visible when you go to paint and stuff like that. And just gonna put in a couple extra parts here. These are rear parts that are the missiles for this, and they're kind of similar to a lot of the other parts that go in here, so I'm just going to show these. Basically flat bits that go into a recess. There's also some rounded parts that go into a recess. Basically all you're doing is putting in glue, enough glue that it makes sense. I like to dry fit the parts too, make sure they're nice and straight and stuff like that, and I'm getting them in straight. You could use tweezers if you need to. I'm just putting them in place here. These particular ones are easy, especially if you leave the wings off and you leave the other parts off, you get them in there. No problem, and the glue will set enough on its own. Now this particular part does require a little bit more care. Those are keyed each side. You got to make them go onto the right side. It fits onto the slot there, and then I added a little bit to the front end of it because you want a very solid connection everywhere where it's glued. And you do kind of have to align it by sight by your hands and make sure that it's like on exactly like the right angle. And I'm smoothing off the excess glue on that one too. Again, when you do that, it'll fill gaps or stuff like that automatically. In fact, I use super glue a lot to fill gaps in general, but I'm going to use some activator on this to make sure it's nice and well set before I move on. I'm not a patient man. Always. There are downsides to the activator, but not too many. And so I've gone through and assembled quite a bit more of that. And we're basically looking at getting the wings on. And the wings go on in a couple of stages where the wing itself pegs into that section. And especially if it's got a little bit of grip to that peg, it's going to stay there for you. And then the gun itself fits onto the back, and you actually glue it in front of where the wing sits. And we're going to take a look at that. And those are keyed. Those long-barreled burst cannons are keyed to each side. There's like a sort of a flange on one side, and so you glue underneath that gun camera. There's a convex section, or sorry, a concave section there, and then that where that flange rests is right about there. So you basically just hook this peg in, slide that up on there. Just make sure that you get enough tightness there between where the wing is, where it's pushing against the wing, so that you're not getting any play. And then you can pretty much hold that to set, or you can add activator like I'm doing here, and it is ready to go. And so pretty much just repeated that, got those on, and there you have a Remora. That is a completed but unpainted Remora stealth drone, which pretty much brings you on to the flight base. And this is something that a lot of people do. I mean, it's on a lot of kits. This is not just for the Remora. This is really standard. But the Remora has a couple of things special about it. Well, maybe just one thing. I tend to trim the bottom edge of these posts because they do go all the way through the stand there. And if there is anything kind of sticking out below the bottom of the stand, it'll make it not sit right. It'll like spin or wobble or whatever. So I usually trim that flat. And then on the Remora, what's kind of specific is you got to trim that tinier top post, because it's not made to take that. You need the wider section to go into the bottom of the kit. And then I'm just trimming that flat. And I tend to just do a little bit of extra cleanup on stuff like that. There's some mold lines on those. I'll usually trim them off and with the back of the knife and stuff. And then I'm going to use plastic cement to go in and attach it. I tend to do that with these. You can use super glue, but it's going to frost on this clear part, and then you would have to paint it. I mean, I'm going to paint this anyway, but honestly, I'd just rather plastic cement it. And then got your connection point down below with that top part trimmed off. It fits perfectly well. and that is a finished Remora, number 2, and then I believe we have finished Remoras 3 and 4 that will eventually pop in. And so, yay, I get to fight against those. Aren't you guys happy for me that I get to fight against 4 Remoras? So much fun. But that's it for now. What do I think about the Remora Forgeworld kit? Overall, I like it pretty well. I mean, it is not the most... what would I say? It's not the most impressive looking kit. It's not like some... It's a specialty unit, but it's not like anything super crazy. We're not talking a Riptide. We're not talking a super heavy or some type of like named character or something. So, but they're cool. They're a bit unique. And as far as the Forgeworld kit itself goes, a bit of warping, a bit of cleanup, but not the worst. And kind of nice. So I would highly recommend it. At the time of this video, this is before the newer 9th edition Tau Codex will release. And so we don't know where Remoras will sit as they come up, but I think right now, if you're not running Remoras, you probably should at least look at them. They're pretty cool, so that's it. And so, hope you guys got a something good out of this, whether it just be basic Forgeworld kit building information, or if you're somebody who likes Tau and you're into Remoras. There will be a second part related to the Remoras later, doing the paint. I have worked on the paint so far, and so, but I think maybe we'll skip a week on that at least. Maybe do something slightly different on topic next week, and come back to the Tau update a little bit later. So, as always, like, share, subscribe, check out the Instagram, and we'll see you next time.